X on the beat. Damn, Polo, you really coming in like that?
Welcome back to another episode of World of Florida. This week we're going to talk about Apalachicola, aka Oyster City. This is a hidden gem on the, I guess you would say, panhandle part of the coastline of Florida. And a few months back, my girlfriend and I took a trip down there. I figured I'd show y'all some clips and give you some of the history of it behind why that area is so interesting. So let's take a look. Alright, I'm sorry that I keep changing the angle of how I'm filming this, but I'm still trying to figure out what is the best way to display my backdrop here. Because I spent a decent amount of time trying to put it together to make it look cool. So just comment below, tell me which segment you thought in this episode had the best angle of displaying the backdrop. Anyway, I wanted to tell y'all about a little bit of a, sorry, I'm screwing things up here, very interesting historic part of the state of Florida. So I figured I would explain the history behind Apalachicola. And Apalachicola is about an hour to maybe an hour and a half south of here, and it's on the coast, so that should tell you it's not the closest beach to Tallahassee, but it's one of the closest beaches to Tallahassee that's like a bigger beach town. So it's real popular with this area. Anyway, let's get into the history behind it. So Apalachicola is one of the most historic cities in Florida, located where the Apalachicola River meets Apalachicola Bay. The name Apalachicola is an Indian word interpreted as a ridge of earth produced by sweeping the ground in preparation for a council or peace fire. Over time, the term has been translated as an area of peaceful people or people on the other side. Land of the friendly people is a common interpretation of the word. And I would argue that that's true. It still is the land of the friendly people. Now, we around here call that part of Florida the Forgotten Coast. And it's not necessarily that it's forgotten, it still gets plenty of tourists that pass through. It's just that you wouldn't consider it the more tourism popular area of Florida. You know, that's more the South Florida area. And I mean, there's parts of North Florida that are tourist friendly as well, like Panama City Beach, or even Pensacola and parts in between. But Apalachicola is more of an area that's, I wouldn't necessarily say strictly, but kind of strictly for Floridians. So if you'd like to be in the old part of Florida and still get that traditional old Florida beach feeling, that's the area you want to move to. Now, I hope this video doesn't blow up and like screw us all over and make all of you non-Floridians move down to that part. Just know that there's only a certain type of people that are allowed to move down there. Sorry, my video cut out behind me here for a second, so I want you to feel like the beach is still right here behind me, and if the video cuts out, then I can't create that illusion, you know. So anyway, what I was saying was Apalachicola is an area that's for a certain type of person who's been in Florida their whole entire life. So if you're the party type, or you know, the big city type, you're that's not going to be your area. I can guarantee you that. And if you try to move to that area with that whole vibe, they're not going to be as friendly as they normally are. And I don't mean that in a bad way. They're just not going to be cool with like you being a wild child party and crazy person all the time. That's for South Florida, okay? This is for like the old Floridians that had to leave South Florida, or they never left to North Florida to begin with. They live in the Apalachicola area. I feel like I rambled on about that enough. Let me get back into the history here. So, even before the city was founded, the area surrounding Apalachicola was an important center for history. Remnants of Native American cultures date back to the middle of Archaic period, and documentation exists that claims Native cultures have lived here during the intervening woodland and Mississippian periods. Archaeologists estimate that the population could have reached 40,000 attracted to the area due to stable water supplies and abundant game. Middens left by these settlers are composed primarily of clam and oyster shells, which you will find out in our clips here that the oyster is a big part of the culture in that area. And it's mainly because where the river comes out, is a big hub for harvesting oysters. I think that's the right way to describe it. But anyway, I wanted to move on to something a little bit more interesting about their seafood industry there. So, the seafood industry in Apalachicola is as important today as it was more than 175 years ago. It is the seafood industry that has most significantly shaped the culture and maritime heritage of Apalachicola, and its seafood industry that anchors a growing nature-based tourism industry throughout the region. Oysters were Apalachicola's first seafood industry. Oysters were sold locally as early as 1836. By 1850, oysters had begun to be packed in barrels and shipped aboard steamers headed north or to other neighboring states. Sustained commercial seafood success began in the late 1880s when German immigrant Hermann Rouge, along with his two sons John G. and George H. Rouge, opened the Rouge Brothers Canning Company in 1885. Through the technique of pasteurization, the Rouges became Florida's first successful commercial seafood packers. Other prominent oyster industry pioneers included Joseph Messina, an early seafood dealer who took over the Bay City Packing Company in 1896 and packed oysters and shrimp under the trademark Pearl brand. By 1915, the Bay City Packing Company shipped canned shrimp to northern markets. Canned shrimp doesn't sound the greatest, but they do have wonderful shrimp in Apalachicola. Okay, besides oysters and shrimp, the sponge industry is another big deal in Apalachicola. From the mid-1870s to the early decades of the 20th century, Apalachicola was part of Florida's sponge industry. The local sponge trade came to rank third in the state. By 1895, over 100 men made their living locally in the short-lived but profitable Apalachicola sponge industry. The sponges were taken by hooking. The hooker sat in the bow and scanned the water for sponges. The oarsmen then moved the boat into position, and the hooker used a long pole with a sharp-pronged tool on the end to bring up the sponges. Once the larger vessel had a full cargo, it returned to port. The three principal buyers of sponge were M. Brash Sr., John G. Rouge, which you heard me speak of earlier, and Joseph Messina, who I also spoke about earlier. The buyers inspected the catch and made sealed bids. The sponges were later shipped to San Francisco, St. Louis, Baltimore, and New York. All right, we'll make this the last part. Apalachicola happened to be a big focal point in the Civil War. A lot of people don't know that. So here's a little brief history on it. When the Civil War began, the Apalachicola River was a vital transportation artery, with its Chattahoochee and Flint River tributaries navigable as far north as Columbus and Albany in Georgia. The river provided access to Apalachicola, a vital southern shipping port. Part of the Union strategy for waging the Civil War was to blockade the southern coastline, choking off commerce and slowly strangling the Confederacy. Rivers like the Apalachicola could then be used to access the interior, as part of the Union naval strategy to blockade southern ports. The U.S. Navy closed access to the Chattahoochee River system at Apalachicola on June 11, 1861, and maintained its coastal presence there for the remainder of the war. The Confederates responded by fortifying upstream, placing heavy cannons along their banks in a desperate effort to hold back the gunboats of the Union Navy. Southern forces defended the town for the first year of the war, but by spring of 1862, the Confederate forces had evacuated the town, principally due to the fact that the state convention abolished the state militia, who were garrisoning Apalachicola. It took the Union ships blockading the port a week to discover that all the troops were gone. A boat expedition into town could find nobody with the authority to surrender the city. Unsatisfied, the Union commander launched a larger expedition capturing 6 sailing vessels and telling the town's few remaining residents they could continue to fish and oyster as long as they took no action to support the Confederate government. The first capture and occupation of Apalachicola lasted just a few hours.